This is just outside my office at Rishon Cellars. Look at this eucalyptus tree. Look how big it is. I have pictures when the winery first started that it was a tiny small tree. Look how it's grown, and think of the history that this tree has seen. Welcome to my office. This in itself is a mini museum. You can see here historical bottles. This is Carmel Alicante. This is a very historical bottle. In my opinion, it's nearly 100 years old. It's got beautiful presented. It's got two labels and it's got the original closure. It's a Carmel Alicante. And what's interesting about this wine is the three brand names which are common to Carmel in its first years all feature on the front label. You've got Carmel, you've got Palwin, which is short for Palestine wine, and you've got Rishon LeZion. And the other thing that's interesting is each wine has a number. This one is number 4A. And these numbers meant that new immigrants who didn't speak the language abroad could ask for the wine by number, because the first thing a new immigrant learns is how to count. This is arguably the most famous bottle of wine ever produced in Carmel. It was produced in 1976. It was produced by Freddie Stiller, the winemaker. It's the Carmel Cabernet Sauvignon Special Reserve. And this was the first wine in Israel ever aged in small oak barrels, and then aged in bottle before release. It was a wine that lasted nearly 20 years. In those days, Carmel produced millions of bottles of brandy, and they were aged in Limousin oak barrels, and he had no budget for barrels for wine. Wines were aged in large, dirty oak barrels, as he decided from his brandy budget to take some Limousin barrels, put them aside to age this wine in. And it was a watershed wine for the Israeli wine industry. It was one of the first varietals. It was one of the first to have Rothschild on the label. And it was the first wine made in a modern international way. And it was really the forerunner of the wine quality revolution which followed. So this is in Carmel and in Israeli wine history, a very historic bottle. This is a sparkling wine from 1958, which is the year after my date of birth. It's a President's sparkling wine, and Carmel in those days used to make wine by the champagne method. Eventually they stopped because they found it too expensive and too labor intensive. This is a picture of Ben-Gurion when he worked at the winery. You have to remember that in those days the winery was a symbol of the Zionism dream come true. So it was a very symbolic company, a very historic company, and an industry that combined agriculture and industry. And this is Ben-Gurion when he came back to meet with the managing director in later years. Actually, the name Carmel was first used only in 1896, when they formed an export marketing company and called it Carmel. Why Carmel? Because Carmel means God's vineyard, and one of the wineries was situated on the southern slopes of Mount Carmel. So they called the export company Carmel Wine Company, and they opened it in places where Jews don't exist anymore in quantities. They opened the first one in 1896 in Warsaw, and they opened branches in Hamburg, in Odessa, in Vienna. They went to England in 1898 and opened the Palestine Wine Trading Company. And they went to America in 1900, which is even before Prohibition. You know, in America, most wineries were founded after the Prohibition. And all these companies were branded Carmel Wine Company. In 1902, the manager of Carmel Wine Company returned to Israel. His name was Zev Gluckskin. And he became the manager of the wineries. And he decided Carmel is a super brand name. I want to use it also in the local market. So he used the name Carmel Oriental to differentiate it from the Carmel Wine Company. And Carmel Oriental supplied the Ottoman Empire. So Constantinople, Cairo, in Damascus, in Beirut, as well as Jerusalem and Jaffa. So there was the Carmel Wine Company and Carmel Oriental. Carmel Oriental became translated Carmel Mizrahi. And these are shares from Carmel Wine Company of Warsaw. You can see 400 rubles a share. And this is a copy of the shares. This is an interesting label. Sweet Port, Palestine. This label could no longer exist because now it's Israel but become Palestine. And also port is we can no longer use the word port or sherry or Malaga or all these other names that used to be used because of an agreement Israel signed in the 1960s. So it's historic to see the quality of the labels there were then and the sort of words they used. This wine was the first ever selected. Selected is Israel's biggest selling brand for nearly 40 years. Here you can see the word selected is very small. It's a description of the Cabernet Sauvignon selected. Today selected became the brand name which heads the label. It's even larger than the name of the winery. So selected wines are easy drinking, fun wines, and after all these years it still remains the biggest selling brand in Israel, and here was the first one in 1972. This is another label, Superior Alicante, from the hills of Judea. Palwin again appears with a number, and here's the word Rishon LeZion, and here we see the logo of Carmel for the first time. People who know the Bible will recognize it. It's the two spies sent by Moses to scout out the promised land that came back and said, it is a land of milk and honey, and this is the fruit. And they came with a bunch of grapes that was so big, they had to carry it on a pole between the two of them. And this is the Carmel logo until today. Carmel has made brandies all the years. Why? Because when they had excess grapes, they used the excess grapes to distill, to make brandy. So Carmel brandies are very famous. This is one of them, which was called 777. We have the Carmel 100. We have the Carmel 120. And this is a brandy which is only being released now. Comes in this presentation box. And this is the last brandy out of Rishon LeZion. The brandy was distilled here in the pot stills in Rishon LeZion, aged between 15 and 30 years. So these are the old brandies that aged in barrels for 30 years in Carmel, in the famous barrel room that I mentioned to you, and also newer brandies that were distilled and aged in used wine casks. So this is a wine finish brandy. It's called Rishon Brandy XO, the last brandy produced from Rishon LeZion wine cellars, and probably the last product. The XO means extra old. With all the history you've seen in Carmel, I wouldn't want you to think that the winery is not very state-of-the-art, very modern. This is more the mass market, the volume wines of Carmel. You have Selected, the biggest selling brand in Israel. You have Private Collection, another very famous brand, which wins prizes for value for money each year. And you have the Appellation series, which has these cartoon animals. And at the top level of Carmel, you have the famous limited edition, Carmel Limited Edition, which is a Bordeaux blend, which gets 91 points from Parker a number of times. You have the Kayumi single vineyard wines, which one of them won the international trophy at Decanter Award, the only Israeli winery to win an award of this level. And then you have the famous Yatir Forest, which is a boutique winery of Carmel, a subsidiary of Carmel. And this, in fact, is the actual wine that got 93 points from Robert Parker, which was then the highest score for an Israeli wine, a kosher wine, or Eastern Mediterranean wine. So here you have Carmel, which you'll find more in the supermarkets, where price is an issue, and Carmel that you'll find more in the quality wine shops. So Carmel Winery today produces 15 million bottles, produces wines at every price point, for every taste, and is one of the best ambassadors for Israeli wines there are. We feel Carmel Winery is well equipped with its old winery at Zichron Yaakov, founded 125 years ago, with its new winery at Montefiore and its 2 boutique wineries at Kayumi and Yatir to continue producing wine for another 100 years.